I booked the cabin in early October, about a week before my girlfriend Lena and I planned to visit her brother in a quiet rural town a few hours away. It wasn't much to look at, but it was cheap, had solid reviews, and the photos made it seem peaceful. A weathered two-story house tucked into the edge of a forest, warm yellow lights glowing through old windows, and a long wraparound porch that made it feel like something from a forgotten era. There was one small note at the bottom of the listing that I barely paid attention to. Basement storage area is private. Do not enter. It sounded normal. Hosts lock off personal spaces all the time. When we arrived just before sunset, though, the place already felt different from the photos. The paint had peeled more than I expected. The porch sagged a little, and the forest seemed to lean in from every direction. There wasn't another house for at least half a kilometer. The host was waiting for us when we pulled up. A man named Victor. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with thin gray hair combed neatly to the side and clothes that looked freshly ironed. He smiled as we got out of the car, but there was something off about it, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Glad you made it," he said, his voice calm but strangely flat. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like wax or old perfume. He gave us a quick tour, the living room with the sagging couch, a kitchen that looked clean but dated, and an upstairs bedroom that felt almost too tidy, like a show home that no one really lived in. When we came back down, Victor stopped at a door near the kitchen, a solid wooden door with a thick metal padlock. He tapped it twice and said, "That stays locked. I store equipment down there. Don't open it. Don't go near it." The tone in his voice was different this time. No warmth, no friendliness. Then, without another word, he left through the front door and drove off into the dark. That first night was quiet, almost too quiet. We sat on the porch with tea, listening to crickets. There were no passing cars, no dogs barking, not even the distant hum of traffic. It was the kind of silence that starts to make your ears ring. We went to bed early. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a faint thud from below us. Just once. A dull, heavy sound. I held my breath and waited, but it didn't come again. Probably the pipes, I told myself. The next day we spent in town trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. But when we came back after dark, the air inside the house felt different. Still heavy, like something was watching from behind the walls. At around 2 a.m., I woke again. This time I heard a dragging sound. Something heavy being pulled slowly across the floor beneath us. It stopped, then started again. 5 seconds. Silence. Then again. Lena whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded. Neither of us moved. The sound came and went for nearly a minute before fading completely. We barely slept that night. The second night, it wasn't dragging. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate. 5 steps. A pause. Then 3 more. Each time, the silence between them grew longer, like whoever was down there was listening. At one point, Lena whispered that she could hear breathing. I did too, low and ragged, like someone was standing just below the floorboards. By the third day, even sunlight couldn't make the house feel normal. I decided to check the basement door. The padlock was still there, but when I leaned close, I smelled something foul drifting out. Damp air and something sour, almost metallic. That night, the noises began earlier. Around midnight, the dragging returned, mixed with faint metallic clinks. I tried to record it on my phone, but all that came through was static. Then as we were getting ready for bed, Lena frowned and pointed at the smoke detector above the bed. "Does that look weird to you?" At first I didn't see it, but then I noticed the small, glossy black dot in the center, perfectly round, reflecting light. I climbed up on a chair and twisted it off the ceiling. Inside was a hidden camera, the tiny green light blinking. I froze. Lena just sat there, pale and shaking. I started checking the room and found another camera, buried inside a small vent grill, both aimed directly at the bed. We packed everything in silence, didn't fold, didn't talk, just left. We drove to the nearest gas station, where I called the police. 2 officers met us there and followed us back to the house. When we got there, the front door was unlocked. The officers searched the place and eventually made their way to the basement door. The padlock was gone. The door stood slightly open. They went down first. We waited at the top of the stairs, listening. A few moments later, we heard one of them shout, then another yell for backup. When they came back up, they weren't alone. Between them was Victor, our host, his clothes filthy, his eyes wide and glassy. He'd been hiding in a storage room below the house, surrounded by monitors and recording equipment. They took him away in handcuffs that night. Lena and I didn't stay to find out what else was down there. We just drove, hours without talking, until we reached a hotel by the highway. That was months ago, but sometimes, even now, I wake up in the dark and swear I can still hear those footsteps, moving somewhere just beneath the floor. I was 23 when this happened. At the time, I had just finished college and was between jobs, picking up small gigs around my town. House sitting, dog walking, that sort of thing. One afternoon, a woman I had worked for before told me her cousin knew someone who needed help watching his place for a few days. The guy's name was Alan, and he said he'd be away for work, but needed someone to stay at his cabin in the woods to look after his dog, a quiet old retriever named Buddy. He sounded polite enough on the phone, though a little too eager when I agreed to help. The pay was decent, so I said yes. When I met him 2 days later, he looked ordinary. Mid-40s, polite, smiling too much maybe, but otherwise unremarkable. His cabin sat at the far edge of town, where the road turned to gravel and trees thickened into a wall of green. Inside, it smelled faintly like cedar and something older, like damp cloth. Alan showed me around, gave me a spare key, explained where Buddy's food was, and told me to stay in the guest room downstairs. "It's quieter there," he said. I remember thinking the whole place felt off. The curtains were drawn tight, even during the day, and every window had heavy locks. The first couple nights were fine. Buddy was sweet, if a little restless, and I mostly spent my evenings reading or watching TV in the living room. But on the third night, something felt different. It started small. I noticed a digital clock on the dresser across from the bed that I didn't remember seeing before. It was newer than everything else in the room, sleek black plastic with a bright red LED display. The rest of the furniture looked decades old. I leaned closer, curious, and noticed a tiny black pinhole just above the numbers. It was angled directly toward the bed. My stomach tightened. I'd seen stories online about hidden cameras disguised as clocks, but I'd never thought I'd actually find one. As I picked it up, I heard a faint buzzing sound coming from inside, like a fan or motor. That's when Buddy suddenly perked up, ears rigid, staring at the door. Then, a sound I'll never forget. A door closing, somewhere deeper in the house. I froze. Alan wasn't supposed to return until Sunday. It was Wednesday night. My pulse was pounding so loud I could barely hear as slow footsteps began moving down the hallway. I set the clock back down, crept to the door, and locked it just before the steps stopped outside. Then a voice, Alan's voice. He said he'd forgotten something in the room and needed to come in. His tone was calm, but slightly winded, like he'd been rushing. I didn't answer. He paused, then said it wasn't what I thought, that the clock was a motion sensor for the dog, that he hadn't wanted to mention it because people get paranoid about technology. That's when I knew. He'd been watching. I backed away from the door, shaking, while Buddy started barking, sharp and frantic. Alan's tone changed. He started pounding on the door, yelling for me to open it so we can talk like adults. His voice turned angry, almost desperate. I looked to the window. It was low enough to climb out, but stiff. My hands were trembling as I unlocked it. Behind me, Alan shouted that if I didn't open up, he'd call the police and tell them I'd broken in. I didn't wait. I pushed the window open and scrambled out, cutting my arm on the frame as I landed in the wet grass outside. I ran through the trees, down the gravel road, not stopping until I saw headlights. My mom picked me up 15 minutes later. I was still shaking when I got in the car. The next morning, I blocked Alan's number and called a lawyer, but there wasn't much anyone could do. Without proof, the clock, a recording, anything, it was just my word against his. I never went back. I never even got paid. The woman who'd connected us stopped replying to my messages, and I never found out if she knew what kind of man he was. For weeks afterward, I barely slept. Every ticking clock made my skin crawl. Sometimes I still wake up in the dark thinking about that faint buzzing sound, and the way he must have been standing somewhere in that house, watching me through that tiny glowing lens.